This week, a clip went viral that most people laughed at. Stephen Bartlett, the host of Diary of CEO, one of the most listened to podcasts on the planet, shared that drinking a few glasses of wine after 3 years of sobriety ruined 3 days of his life. His sleep score dropped, he ate badly, he missed the gym, he spiraled. And the internet did what the internet does. It mocked him. Vice ran a piece, Reddit had a field day. Brad Stulberg, one of the sharpest writers on performance and identity, posted about it on LinkedIn and sparked a real conversation. That's where I saw the clip. But here's what I want to do this week. I don't want to pile on Stephen Bartlett, and I don't want to necessarily defend the life that he's created either. I want to use this moment as a mirror, as so many times these things can be. Because the real question this story raises isn't, is 3 glasses of wine really that bad for you? The real question is, what does it mean when the pursuit of your best self makes you so brittle that a glass of wine breaks 3 days? And more importantly, is that story living in you somewhere else? That's what we're sitting with this week in the 5. 5 pillars, 5 conversations. It's the 5. All right, well, welcome. Monday evening, 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I'm glad to be back. Took last week off because of the holiday. I was conflicted. I wanted to keep the streak going. It's a new show, so I wanted to show up, on Monday at 5 o'clock as you would expect me to be there. But I decided to not go into the house and record and spend more time outside with my family, being present, being in the moment. And interestingly enough, this ties into kind of this thread that we're going to talk about in today's episode about optimization, which can be the tools we're going to talk about, but optimization can also be being tied to routines and things that don't allow you to be flexible. It makes you really rigid. And so if I was going to be, perfectly disciplined and stick to the schedule, I would have recorded last week. But I gave myself the freedom to live, to be present, and that's a lot of the conversation we're going to have coming up. And before we get into it further, I just want to point out that there's going to be a lot of talk about alcohol on this podcast or this episode. And don't get lost in that. This is not about alcohol. This is about over-optimization, becoming so tied to a sleep score or a glucose score or whatever score it is, where when you break away from it, it ruins your day. And so it's more about that than it is anything else. So don't think this is a conversation about alcohol. Alcohol will come up a lot because the video clip that we're discussing talks about it. But this is not what it's about. I also just want to be fully transparent and say I have been a victim of trying to optimize things. I've had a Whoop band before. I've had I have an Apple Watch. I use my Fitness Pal. I've tried to do some of these things, but also I have gotten to the point where I only use them when I do little resets to get a baseline for how I feel when I'm doing things the way that I think I want to do them. And once I know it's working, I get rid of them. So I only wear my Apple Watch when I work out. I don't wear a Whoop anymore. One reason is I remember seeing on Twitter years ago someone joking about Whoop scores, and they weren't sure if they felt like they were tired because they were actually tired or if they felt tired because their Whoop score said they slept poorly. And the thing with the Whoop band, not to pick on Whoop, there's tons of ones like that, but we become so ingrained with those scores that the mind begins to believe the score over how our body might feel. And we'll get into that on some of these subjects as well. And so you could have your Whoop move wrong in the middle of the night and become loose or get off your arm the wrong way. So the score is not really reflective of the great 12 hours of sleep that you got. But yet you wake up and see a low score and now you feel tired. When really, if you didn't have the score, you would have felt great. And that's the risk in this optimization life that we're talking about. So this is this week's episode. I'm excited to dive into it. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to pull one specific event through all of the pillars: spirit, mind, body, money, and creativity. They've always been able to find a thread amongst them, but they've all been different sources. So we still have multiple sources, but they're all going to come back to this video. And I'm sure you've seen it. The final thing I want to give you before we jump into the first one of spirit is that this is a week where I'm going to dive in a little bit further into money. So the money section is going to run a little longer. We're going to talk about this optimization impact on finances, but then we're also going to talk about some economic and stock market information as well. It's been a few weeks since I've done that. I don't want to do it every week, but I do want to dive through headlines that may or may not be impacting your life plan, financial plan, and portfolio, break those down for you so you know why they're in the news, what they mean, so you can decide whether or not you should make any decisions based on them. So that will be in the money section as we get further, and you'll know when I make that switch. So let's get to spirit. The data-driven life and the question it can't answer is the subtitle I came up with for this section. So spirit is about the inner life. It's your connection to your higher power, connection to your creator. It's about what you're oriented toward, what gives life meaning, and what you're in relationship with beyond any trackable and measurable information. And that's what this story, the Stephen Bartlett story, talks about or brings up for us. So the first headline I found was from the Global Wellness Summit, and it puts out one of the most trusted annual forecasts in the industry. This year, they named the over-optimization backlash one of its top 10 wellness trends for 2026. Usually, it's going to be more about optimizing more. And this year, one of the trends is going against over-optimization. Their finding was that the tracking everything era is provoking a measurable cultural counter-reaction. A new hunger is emerging, not for more data, but for more depth, for presence, for experiences that don't require a score. And if we dive deeper, we're living through a moment where health has never been more measurable, and the access to these measurements has never been greater, and it's never felt more demanding at the same time. Sleep is scored, glucose is graphed, aging is tracked, workouts are logged, and well-being has quietly shifted from something you feel to something you perform correctly. That shift is a spiritual one, even if it doesn't announce itself that way. So when Stephen Bartlett says a few glasses of wine ruined him for 3 days of his life, part of what strikes people is the language, because words matter. Ruined, not disrupted, not threw me off a bit, ruined. 3 full days completely wasted. And there's kind of a grief in that framing, a grief that this one spontaneous human thing, in this example, sharing wine, loosening up, being with people, had such an outsized consequence that is a life. It had such an outsized consequence in a life built around optimization function. The wellness backlash isn't really about alcohol. It's about a deeper question. If everything in your life is a service to peak performance, what exactly are you performing for? Who exactly are you performing for? And what's the inner life beyond the metrics? Mystics across traditions have had a word for this for centuries: attachment. Not attachment to bad things, but attachment itself. The clinging to a particular version of how things should go that makes you rigid rather than rooted. I have to have this score. I have to have this much sleep. I have to do these things in order to be this. The over-optimization trap is a spiritual trap because it promises freedom. Freedom from fatigue, from fog, from disease, but delivers a different kind of captivity, taking away your freedom. A captivity where one disruption means catastrophe. And so at what point did living become about performance? I don't know when, but you definitely know it's been in the last handful of years as these tools we have been given to us and then put in front of us everywhere. Sponsoring podcasts, in your Instagram feed, on Facebook, your friends have them, is definitely a big business, as we're going to get to in the money section. But when did we start living for performance? There's a version of the health journey that I deeply respect. The commitment to his body, to clarity, to longevity, talking about Bartlett. That's real and that's important. I talk about the alignment of spirit, mind, body, and money. I don't believe that you can live your authentic life without taking care of your body. Multiple reasons for that we've talked about before, but body and taking care of it is really important. But I don't think it is so important that you take away your ability to live and enjoy life and be present in the moment. Is there a version of optimization that actually pulls you away from the present moment? When you're so busy measuring and managing your experience that you stop having it, or you avoid it. The spiritual life, as I understand it, isn't about having the perfect sleep score. It's about being available to what's real, to what's here, to what's alive. And sometimes what's alive is a glass of wine, or a piece of cake, or some ice cream, or staying up late, take your pick, with someone you love. And one more thing in this section I want to touch on before we get into mind is it all roots. The reason to optimize starts in a good place. It's when we begin to be attached to this optimization. When optimization becomes a part of who we are and what we stand for. I think it's a part of Stephen Bartlett's brand almost, is that he is very optimized because he talks about it on his podcast. And it's not fair to him to have to always live up to that. We are human, we are imperfect. But it is part of his brand, and so I think it adds that much more to it. I also wonder if the choice of using the words ruined was to be a little bit of drama, to bring people in, knowing that it's going to get people talking about the clip, which is going to drive people to his audience. Nothing wrong with that. The Diary of a CEO is one of my favorite podcasts. I don't listen to every episode. I think there's a lot of them that bring a little bit of fear mongering or topics that I just don't find very interesting or beneficial to me. But by all, I really admire what Stephen Bartlett's been able to build with his podcast. It's a legit business, a massive business. So there might have even been a little bit of using some choice words to bring more attention to the episode, to increase the audience size and all of those things as well. So at the end of the day, the real question is, what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing to live a better life? Or are you optimizing to have the perfect score? And at what point does the optimization take away from you living your authentic life? I think the optimization tools are important. They can help us get on track. They can help us figure out what's going on. They can help us become better aligned and live our authentic life, but they shouldn't define our authentic life. And that's where I believe it becomes problematic. All right, so let's dive into mind. When your best self is too brittle to bend. So mind, it sometimes is about identity, who you think you are, how you hold that, and how it shapes everything downstream. What you believe you can achieve. You have to believe it before you see it. Your mind creates your perspective, which creates your reality. And so in this optimization story, if you believe that you have to be highly optimized to be the best version of yourself, then can you ever be your best version of yourself if you aren't optimized? And that's where one off decision can make 3 days be wasted. So Brad Stulberg, as I mentioned in the intro, he is a performance writer and author. He wrote The Master of Change, The Way of Excellence, great books. I have not finished The Way of Excellence yet, but I enjoy his social media presence and his writing. So he's the one that put this clip on my radar on LinkedIn, and he framed it this way. A popular podcaster recently said drinking a few glasses of wine ruined the next 3 days of his life. He said it messed up his sleep score and da-da-da-da-da. And what followed this post was a sharp, generous critique, not of Bartlett personally, although there were some attacks, but we'd throw those out because those types of people are so low energy, so low vibrational energy that they're just there complaining. But there was a great conversation that went on. But it was more about the optimization culture that he represents. And the post lit up thousands of comments and became one of the more substantiated conversations on LinkedIn I've seen in a number of months. And if we dive deeper, the critique developed across his books and LinkedIn posts. In his critique, developed across his books and his LinkedIn posts, Stulberg cuts to something precise. The problem isn't that Bartlett tracks his health. The problem is identity fragility. What happens when a person's sense of self becomes so fused with their performance metrics that any deviation produces cascading collapses. Stulberg has written extensively about the importance of what he calls identity diversification, building a self that rests on multiple foundations so no single disruption can knock the whole structure down. The person who is only an optimizer is uniquely vulnerable to the moment optimization fails, and it will fail. What the critics, from Stulberg to other people commenting, are noticing is this. Bartlett's experience of 3 ruined days doesn't sound like an alcohol problem. It sounds like a self problem, not a moral failing, a structural one. When you build your identity almost entirely on the performance of a healthy, disciplined, biometrically sound self, and you've done the work to optimize your body to that level, you become exquisitely sensitive to anything that disrupts it. Your sleep score isn't just data anymore. It's a verdict on who you are. And a bad verdict means a bad day, and a bad day means a bad you. That's not strength. It's fragility dressed in the clothes of discipline. The psychologists call it conditional self-worth, worth that is contingent on continued performance. And the irony is that the more you achieve, the more conditional self-worth can tighten its grip, because now you have more to protect. And so I want you to think about this. Who are you when you're not performing well? How do you view yourself when you're not at your most optimized? Don't think about what you do to get back on track. Who are you in that moment when the score is bad and the day is derailed and the plan fell apart? Because the answer, that relationship with yourself in that moment, is actually the most important thing. More important than the sleep score, more important than the streak. Stulberg's work points towards something I find compelling. The goal isn't to optimize yourself into invincibility. The goal is to be so grounded in who you are, not what you produce, not how you perform. And that the disruption is something you can move through rather than something that breaks you. A wine glass broke 3 days. That's worth sitting with. Not to judge it, but to ask, what in me might a single disruption break? Let's go to body. The real science and the question it doesn't answer. Body is about embodiment, your lived relationship with the physical self. Not just what the data says, but what it's like to be in your body. And I want you to be honest about both sides. So Stephen Bartlett's not wrong about the physiology. I remember my freshman year of college, one of the upperclassmen got arrested at a fraternity party for underage drinking. We had to go to alcohol class as a team. And I remember being told about how drinking impacts your sleep. It impacts your sleep for a number of days, how you're going to play. If you were to drink on a Thursday night, your play on Saturday is going to be impacted by this. It's always stuck with me. So the physiology is there. Bartlett is not lying about what he felt. He even has recent episodes of The Diary of CEO with addiction medicine specialists that laid out the science clearly. Alcohol genuinely disrupts sleep architecture, elevates cortisol, and particularly in someone who hasn't had a drink for a while, can produce an exaggerated physiological response as the body recalibrates. Alcohol is basically poison, so it's got to be recalibrate from this influx of poison it's not used to seeing. There's real science that stands behind what he experienced. But the real question is the story that gets built around that. So here's what we know. Alcohol is a net negative for sleep quality. It may help you fall asleep, but it disrupts the deeper restorative stages, the passing out phase, then into the crappy sleep. For someone who has been sober for years and has calibrated their body to a particular baseline, even moderate drinking can produce a response that feels significant. So Stephen wasn't making it up. He wasn't being dramatic about a hangover. What he described, worse sleep, poor food choices, missed training, residual fog, it's real. It's a real psychological cascade that alcohol can trigger, especially in a body not used to it. But, and this is where the critics, Ben Sixsmith makes a fair point, the magnitude of that cascade tells us something. Not something shameful, something informative. If one disruption to one variable produces 3 days of cascading dysfunction, the question worth asking is, how resilient is the system overall? How much margin for error exists if the life that's been built? There's a version of bodily attunement that deepens your capacity to recover from disruption. And there's a version of bodily attunement that makes you so sensitized to every deviation that system has no flex, no slack, no room for being human. We're not perfect. The body is a wisdom system, not a performance system. It doesn't just tell you what's optimal, it tells you what's real. And sometimes what's real is that you need to build in more capacity to absorb life, not less. So I have a lot of respect for people who take care of their body. I try to do that myself. I preach it. It's important. It's a lot of work. It's commitment. There's no dismissing that. But I want to offer a distinction that I've found useful. There's a difference between listening to your body and managing your body. Listening means you receive the information, you feel what you feel, you adjust with curiosity rather than control. Managing means your body is a system to be optimized, and any signal that the system is underperforming is a threat to be corrected. The people that I know who have the healthiest relationship with their physical selves aren't the ones with the best metrics. They have good metrics, but not the best. They're the ones that can have a hard week, a late night, a glass of wine, and respond with presence rather than panic. They trust the system enough to let it fluctuate. They know the body isn't fragile. They are. And so what I think is really important in this is a couple things. The feel side of things. I mentioned having an Apple Watch and all those things. I try to use those to figure out what is the cadence that I need, what is the workout regimen that works best for my body. And then when I get to where I want to be, whether it's, a certain amount of calorie goal that I have, and not being attached to it, but having a goal. And if I don't hit it, that's fine. But having something to strive towards. And when I'm doing that consistently after using these tools, removing the tools and just going off a feel. And sometimes you can do everything perfect and your body just needs an extra day of rest. And you can listen to it and you say, all right, well, today, you know what? I'm just not feeling it. I'm going to listen to my body. I'm not going to do that extra workout. I'm not going to eat that crappy lunch that I wanted to go have. Just listening to your body is your best guide. It's going to tell you what you need. It's not that these tools aren't valuable. And it's not that you shouldn't have them. It's just that you shouldn't let those tools be your guide. They should be a tool that helps you make decisions based off of how you feel, and you pull this information in to help you make those good decisions. And also, how much fun is it to be living your life to maximize optimization? Like, I have a problem with the saying everything in moderation, because sometimes I think we're told everything in moderation because the people telling us know that moderation will keep us hooked. Sugar, for example, everything in moderation. Well, yeah, if you just have a little bit of sugar every so often, you're going to keep that little bit of addiction that you have, and you're going to keep eating those sweets as time goes on. It's not good for the sugar industry for us to not have it in moderation. You got to have a little bit in there to keep it in your system. So I think that, but also at the same point, I think it's important to be able to allow yourself the flexibility to have something in moderation. And so there's a balance, and I think everybody's balance is going to be different. Discipline and willpower is part of it. I don't love having sweets in the house because my discipline and willpower aren't there. Doesn't mean that if we didn't have it in the house, I still wouldn't get a dessert. I wouldn't go get ice cream. I would, but I wouldn't put myself in a position to have it all the time, because if I walk by the cabinet and there were some cookies in there, I'm going to eat them. And so it's understanding yourself and using these tools to help you figure out what puts you in the best position, but then not sacrifice living for the optimization. All right, let's dive into the money pillar. And then remember, going to continue the thread with money. I'll take a slight sidebar to talk about the economy and stock market, and then we'll finish with creativity. So the economy of broken. Who profits from your optimization anxiety? I think it's a pretty strong byline. Money isn't just about financial wealth. It's about values, about what we exchange our finite time and attention for. And the Bartlett story has a money angle that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, and I haven't overly researched it. So if you've written about this or talked about this or heard it elsewhere, I'm sure other people, I'm not the only one with this thought, but I haven't seen anything talk about it. And the deeper part of it is that I haven't heard talked about it is the business behind all this. First off, the business behind the Diary of CEO. I mentioned that this is a massive podcast production network. Stephen has an awesome building with an awesome gym that he built for his team, but this is not him coming into an office suite like this, setting up one camera, having a team to help edit it, and being really small. Like, this is a big business. This is his livelihood that comes through the podcast, and all the opportunities come with it. This is a multi-million-dollar business we're talking about. And his podcast has become a representation of this optimization culture and brands. A lot of his sponsorships are health-related things for optimization. So his podcast is not just a podcast. It's a platform for the wellness economy. Supplement companies, health technology brands, longevity clinics, the content and the commerce are deeply intertwined, which makes this even more exaggerated for Bartlett, because so much of what he talks about, or so much of what is on his show, is about this stuff. So his entire economy built on one core premise. You are not yet optimized enough, but you could be. Sleep trackers, HRV monitors, continuous glucose monitors, cold plunge equipment, red light panels, peptide stacks, metabolic testing, biological age scores. Each product or service in this ecosystem offers the same implicit promise. Track this, fix this, and you'll unlock a better version of yourself. I'm guilty of having some of those. I'm guilty of wanting some of those. So this is not as if I'm doing things perfectly. And the thing that makes this economy work, the engine underneath it all, is anxiety. Specifically, the anxiety that you are performing below your potential, that your sleep is costing you, that your glucose response is aging you, that your recovery scores means today is a wasted day. The viral clip went viral in part because it crystallized this anxiety in an unusually visible way. A man with every resource available to him, money, access, time, motivation, still found himself derailed by a few glasses of wine. And his response was not that the night was fun, let me get back to it. His response was the language of catastrophe. Ruined. That language is in part a product of a wellness culture that's taught all of us, that deviation from optimal is loss. That any night your body doesn't recover perfectly is a night stolen from you. The honest question for all of us is, what am I actually buying when I buy into this? And is the anxiety I'm purchasing, the hypervigilance, the score watching, the optimized life, actually making me free, or is it a more expensive, more socially acceptable version of the same trap, organizing my life around fear? I'm obviously not against wellness. I mean, body is part of my alignment. And I think the things that Bartlett talks about, sleep, nutrition, movement, recovery, are real and important. And I talk about them sometimes myself. But the real thing to come back and think about is, what is health for? Is it for the score? Is it to maximize output? Is it to extend lifespan? Or is it so that you can be fully present in your life, including the moments that don't score well? I think it's both, or both sides of that argument. Throw out for the score. Health is not for the score. But I do think it is important to be healthy to maximize your output. You have an authentic life to live. You have unique gifts and talents that are supposed to be given to the world, brought to the world, to use to serve others. You need to be in your best physical shape possible. You need to be in good shape to be able to execute that. I want to live a long life, a long, healthy life. I don't want to live a long life and not be healthy. So I want a long, healthy lifespan. You can't do that if you're not taking care of yourself. So this is where it's balance. Understand where you are. Use some of these tools. Optimize a little bit, but don't be defined by the optimization. Don't define your success. Don't define your wealth. Don't define your happiness by how optimized are you. Because then you become a servant to the optimization, and that's not living. Because if optimization is making you less free, less spontaneous, less available to the unplanned moments of being alive, if a few glasses of wine with someone you love now carries a 3-day penalty of recovery and setting back, then what exactly have you optimized for? It's not a judgment of a particular choice. It's a values question. And I think it's one that's worth sitting with. All right, sidebar. Let's talk about the headlines that may or may not be impacting your life plan, financial plan, and portfolio. And so I have 5 headlines I want to talk real quickly about. You've probably heard about them. It's been a few weeks since I've done this, so I have a number to cover that will go back in time. But I think these are things you may have heard about I want you to be aware of and understand why they're in the news. The first, Moody's stripped the U.S. of its last perfect credit rating score. So we used to be AAA on Moody's, and now we are AA1. Still very good, but it's the first time in history that the U.S. Has been downgraded on all 3 major credit agencies. I don't remember when the other ones did, but it's been a while. It was a bigger deal when those first did it. And so Moody's has held our perfect score since 1917. So a century of the AAA status is now gone. So why does this matter? Or let's talk about why did they do this. So the reason behind it, large and growing deficits, and a political system that stems multiple presidencies that shows no meaningful ability to address them. Moody's is projecting the U.S. federal debt could reach 134% of GDP by 2035, which would mean that debt payments would consume 30 cents of every dollar of federal revenue that same year. So what does it mean to you? Well, for most of us everyday investors, not much. Headline move in the market, but that's about it. But for the longer term, it is something to pay attention to. It is something to think about when you're electing officials in the future. Are they addressing this problem? Are they doing anything to bring down the debt, to make sure that we can maintain being able to make these payments? We're still by far the most trusted system in the world, by most parts, depending on who you talk to. But at the end of the day, the U.S. dollar is still the main currency. People still bring their assets here, even with this downgrade. So it's not going to change anything in your life today. It's just something to be aware of. And more importantly, I wanted to address it because it's an opportunity for people who fearmonger to point to this as the downfall of the U.S. and that we're going to be having big problems because of it. It very well could, but we've had the credit rating get cut twice by other agencies, and look what's happened since then. So just something to be aware of, and something, again, I want you to understand why it was in the news, because it sounds like a big deal and there is something behind it, but it's not something that I believe is going to be impacting your life today. The second headline is coming from the Fed. We talked about in April how they held rates steady. There was the most dissent since 1992. 8-4 was the vote. So we have some people wanting to lower rates, others saying let's keep it. But the big thing I want to talk about on the Fed is Jerome Powell is out. So April was his last meeting as the chair, and Kevin Warsh is stepping in, inheriting a Fed that's deeply divided on direction, with inflation going the wrong way. We'll hear in a second about. So what I'm most interested in is, how does the new chair handle everything going on? Does he maintain the independence from the president? That was a big problem that President Trump had with Powell. Was President Trump wanted to see rates lowered. Powell and the rest of the Fed did not. And so there was a lot of pressure to try to get the Fed to do so. There's supposed to be a divide, checks and balances. The Fed is supposed to operate independently from the political parties from the president. And so now we have somebody new coming in that was picked by Trump. Powell was put in by Trump as well. But the concern for some people is this is just going to be Trump being able to tell the Fed whatever he wants. I don't necessarily think that's the case, because some of the first comments that have come out from the new chair have been not what necessarily President Trump would want to see have happen. So I'm optimistic the independents will be there. I'm optimistic things will be handled the right way, and things will continue to go forward. The Fed has a lot of power. Some argue more than it should. They also speak a lot, which kind of moves the markets. So anytime the Fed or one of the Fed folks or talk, it's usually going to make its way into the markets one way or another. So the biggest thing, again, is the new chair and paying attention to how he starts his new term. I mentioned inflation. The Fed is always paying attention to the inflation. Their goal is to control it and keep it low, not too low, but also not allowing it to get too high. Inflation was 3.3% in March, and the projection from some is that we might see 6% in the second quarter. The reason for all of this is gas prices, energy prices from the Iran war. So the Strait, we know everything that's going on over there. You know the gas prices are up. That ends up trickling down. But the reason that can cause inflation is the cost to ship goods, the cost to make goods goes up because the cost of gasoline is going up and oil is going up. And so businesses don't feel that price increase. We end up feeling it. It gets passed on to the consumer. And so that is the concern. That is why you can see that this could lead to a recession. If everything's getting more expensive and wages don't keep up with it, then consumers cannot buy as much as they wanted as they could before, or we get protective and we begin to save more and prepare for a slower time. That slows down the economy as well. So inflation is back. It's not out of control like it was, but there are some projections that it could get high again, which would not be good. And remember, you know this, but just as a reminder, even when inflation slows or goes back down, it doesn't reset the prices back to where it once was one day. These prices have been elevated, and then the new rate of inflation, if it goes down, just means it's going to grow from that new rate at a little bit slower rate. And so it's obvious why this is an important thing to pay attention to. The headline number 4 comes from the bond market, not an area I talk about very much. And truthfully, this story is over for the time being, but I do want to bring it up and address it because the 30-year Treasury hit 5.19%. It's the highest level since the great financial crisis. And so the 30-year Treasury is an important number, and seeing it spike like that is usually not a good sign. It spooks the market. It has since come back down. So it's not something to say we're out of the woods yet, but it was a big news. If you're paying attention to the financial news, there was a lot of talk about it. And the rates have come back down, which is good, but I just wanted to bring that up, that there was that moment over the last month where the 30-year spiked, which caused a little bit of fear and concern, but things have come back down. And the final one stems from the jobs market. In April, the U.S. economy added 115,000 jobs. Unemployment held at 4.3%. So on paper, looks good. But if you go a little bit deeper, there's another story that lies underneath there. So underneath the numbers, federal employment is down 345,000 jobs since January. Depending on your stance, that might be a good thing. Consumer spending plans softened in May, more people shifting towards essentials and pulling back on discretionary purchases. And the lived experience for a significant portion of Americans doesn't match what you hear on the news. Meaning the lived experience doesn't match 401k or the market being at all-time highs. That businesses are doing well. A lot of people aren't feeling that. So this is the K-shape economy that we hear oftentimes. So there's a phrase we're sitting with, the official economy and the felt economy. And I mentioned right now they're moving in different directions. That's the K. The stock market's near record highs, corporate profits are at record margins, but a lot of people feel like they're treading water or worse. So both of those things can be true at once, because they are. And where you land in that gap depends almost entirely on what you own, what you owe, and how exposed you are to rising rates. So I don't think any of these headlines require a panic response. I don't ever think they will. But they do require your attention, just an understanding so you know what's going on. Why is the market moving? Why are these things happening? Why are interest rates going up? Why are my savings rates going down? All of these things. You need to know why, but I don't think you need to make action because of it. So I'll always try to keep you informed, try to keep you grounded, try to keep you focused on your life plan and your financial plan. And the reason you're tied to the market is for the long term. And over the long term, ups and downs, but it's been up and to the right. And I have the confidence that it will continue to do that. And I tell my clients this all the time. If I didn't believe in that, I would quit managing investments and only focus on planning, because I would not be doing something I don't believe will be working for the long run. So short-term news, short-term effects. You're focusing on the long term if you're watching this, most likely. All right, so let's get to the last pillar of creativity: permission, pleasure, and the creative case for looseness. So creativity is about self-expression. I think we all should be expressing ourselves creatively. The part of you that needs to make things, explore things, follow something without knowing where it goes. And then with this pillar, I think is the most underplayed angle of this whole conversation. So the over-optimization backlash isn't just a wellness story. It's a culture story. Across 2026, the most shared content in wellness and lifestyle spaces have been conspicuously analog. We've talked about some of these. Scream circles, the somatic movement, low stimulation retreats, handcrafts, unstructured time. The people driving this wave aren't anti-health, they're anti-performance. They're asserting something quiet and stubborn, that there's value in the experience that can't be scored. And you're seeing this with younger generations as well. Wine culture, dinner culture, the long conversations that go nowhere useful, these have been historically great incubators for the creative life. Not because the alcohol is magic, it's not about alcohol, but because of the looseness that's there. I mentioned long dinners, long conversations, not just the wine. The state of that good conversation, good wine, good company can produce, where the guard comes down, associations run free, where you follow a thought past where you'd normally stop, in a state that's generated some of the most important ideas, art, and connection in human history. You can create alone, it's harder. Creating with others, even if it's sharing ideas, is way more productive. The creative process, almost by definition, requires willingness to be a little undone, to let something move through you that you didn't plan, to not know exactly what the next thing will look like. And that requires a kind of porousness, an openness to experience that hyper-optimization actively works against. When everything in your environment is curated for peak output, when every input is evaluated for its effect on your recovery score, when spontaneity itself becomes a risk to be managed, you have built a life that is, creatively speaking, very small, very controlled, very safe, not creative. And safe is not where the interesting life lives. This isn't an argument for hedonism. It's an argument for a life that appreciates the importance of flow states, absorption, losing track of time in something that genuinely matters to you. That kind of aliveness doesn't optimize. It can't be scheduled. It requires you to be at least sometimes genuinely available to what is actually happening, not managing response to it. And I would like to think that my decision to not record the 5 last week represents what I just described. So the creative question I want to leave with you: what would you make? What would you say? Where would you go? Who would you be if you weren't optimizing? Not if you were being reckless, not if you were destroying your health, but if you gave yourself even occasionally permission to follow something without measuring the cost first. The most alive people I know aren't the most optimized. They're the most present. They're available to the moment in a way that makes them magnetic to ideas, to other people, to the unexpected things that turn out to be the most important thing. That presence requires risk. It requires being willing to have a 3-day hangover every now and then, metaphorically, literally, whatever it is for you, in exchange for a night that was actually alive. So I'm not telling you to have glasses of wine. I'm not telling you to have ice cream. I'm not telling you to skip your workouts, or not skip your workouts. I'm telling you to live. All right. That is it for this week's episode of The 5. Thank you as always for joining. This episode was brought to you by Santiago, santiago.life. If you want to look at how does all of this fit into your life plan, are you over-optimizing? How do you align in a way that doesn't become too optimized but also keeps you aligned with the authentic version of yourself to live your authentic life? That's what we're doing at Santiago, santiago.life, if that sounds like something you're interested in. All right, I hope you have a great rest of the evening. I will be back next Monday, 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, to talk through the 5 pillars, 5 conversations, another episode of The 5. Until then, keep pursuing.